Thank you first, everyone, for attending today's webinar. So first things first, let's introduce ourselves. Chris, you want to get us started off there?
Brilliant. Thanks, David. So those that haven't come across me before, I'm Chris Holloway. So I'm Head of Accessibility for ReciteMe. I'm a 39-year-old male with brown spiky hair, and I'm currently in my home office in the UK, which is very windy at the moment. It wasn't as nice weather as yesterday. I look after the audit and consultancy parts of ReciteMe, as well as our internal accessibility as well. So very similar to some of the things and positions that hopefully we're all in. And I'm looking forward to the webinar. So back to you, David.
Thank you, Chris. Excited to have you join us today. My name is David Saibo. I am part of our customer experience team here at ReciteMe. I wear a couple different hats, but my primary function is to make sure that our customers receive actionable results. And that starts during the procurement process and goes all the way to our wonderful customer success team that try to bridge the gap and make sure that you guys are well on your accessibility journey and that we're providing you with the right tools and services to accomplish that. I am also a late 30-year-old white man. I am bald. Chris has a nice spiked hair. I do not, but I make up for it with a beard. So excited to be with you all here today. All right, can we go to next slide, Chris? Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda for today. Everyone here, I assume, is here because of the Title II mandate. So we'll talk a little bit about what the requirements are behind that. Specifically, how are you going to be able to demonstrate that you're complying with that mandate? We're going to talk about where your exposure is across your organization. There's a couple different areas. Some of them are more important than others. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to give you some actionable advice, how to identify and remediate documents at scale. So you're going to leave here with a knowledge and also some action plan. We'll do a live product demo of that PDF remediation platform. And then at the end, we've got some more for any key takeaways, and then obviously questions from the audience here as well. Okay, so first here, I'm going to read a quote, the definition of accessibility in the context of digital. Quote, accessibility is about giving everyone a fair and equitable chance to access information, services, and experiences, whilst actively promoting and supporting independence. I think there's a little bit more that we can unpack on that, but this is the gist of what we're talking about when we're talking about digital accessibility. From a legal perspective, how we apply the previous quote is under the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA. It's been around for a while. I think we're probably usually most familiar with it in a physical context. Again, today we're going to be talking about it in the digital sense. So we're talking about websites, mobile apps, online documents, etc. There is a specific mandate from the Justice Department. Organizations that fall under Title II, specifically state and local government agencies, are being held to the same standards essentially as the federal government has been. But the Justice Department is asking all state and local government agencies to match that criteria. So that's going to be against the international standard called WCAG. Specifically, it's going to be against WCAG versions 2.1, level AA. The goal of the mandate is to remove those digital barriers. It's that quote that we started with on the previous slide, creating an equitable experience, making sure that people have the ability to interact with your digital assets just the same as any other constituent, and that there's no barriers for them when it comes to accessing information or engaging with services. In addition to being a legal requirement, it also promotes inclusivity and participation in society. Digital accessibility is very much a rising tide lifts all boats situation. So we can spend a little bit more time talking about the ADA. We can spend a little bit more time talking about Title II, but this is a legal requirement coming for all state and local government agencies. Elephant in the room, the original date was going to be last Thursday for organizations with over 50,000 population. That has been moved back a year. So there's a little bit more time to address this, Think of that as an opportunity for your organization to meet these standards, but not a reason to delay. It's just an opportunity to move further to the goalpost. So organizations over 50,000 people, your deadline is now April of 2027. If you have less than 50,000 people in your constituency, then your date will be April 2028.
Quick question, David.
Sure.
Does that mean that we should slow down with any of the remediation efforts that we're putting in at the moment? How do you feel that deadline kind of changes things?
Well, you could. I wouldn't say I recommend it. From my perspective, and of course we might be a little bit biased here, but from my perspective, that means for organizations that have less than 50,000 in population, that means there have been over 4 years since this mandate was originally released to when action is required. So I think pleading we didn't have enough time, we were unaware, I think that's going to fall. I think that's going to fall flat. So yes, it is an opportunity to make up if for any reason you were a little bit behind. Don't feel bad about that. But if you're viewing it as an extension, I would caution that if anything, it just means that you're going to be held to a higher standard when it actually comes time for enforcement.
Thanks, David.
So you might be asking, well, does this even apply to me? Maybe I'm exempt. It's pretty broad. It applies to all federal, state, and local government agencies. Most federal agencies are already complying with this through other parts of the Americans with Disability Act and other federal laws. The state and local government, your individual state may already have something in place. Colorado is a good example where they've been mandating WCAG 2.1A compliance since last July. So some states are already ahead of this. But when it comes to the Title II mandate, state and local governments are absolutely part of the scope here. In fact, it was designed for them. So if you even remotely fall under that umbrella, I think you should be paying attention. There's other folks outside of state and local governments, though, nonprofit organizations, private businesses, employment entities, education institutions. If you are receiving taxpayer funds, if you are collaborating with a state and local government agency, by extension, this applies to you. We're using the same logic that works for the federal government. Anyone that receives federal tax funds, anyone that does business with the federal government is being held to these standards. It's going to work the same way for all the vendors that work on the state and local governments. So a very, very broad mandate here. I see we have a question from Michelle. Can you repeat those deadlines? Absolutely, Michelle. So if your organization represents a population of 50,000 or more, the new deadline is going to be April of next year, April 2027. If your organization represents less than 50,000 people, you get an additional year. So your deadline instead would be April of 2028. Good question, Michelle. Guys, feel free to keep those coming in the chat. Happy to expand on anything as well if you find that my answer is not quite what you're looking for. Steps to become ADA compliant. So enhancing the user experience. We can talk a little bit in a while about ReciteMe's toolbar. It gives visitors control over their user experience while they're on your website or when they're interacting with your PDFs. Accessibility compliance. This is usually what people are probably most thinking of. The HTML code of your website, it needs to be built in a correct manner so that folks that are using assistive technologies, most commonly a screen reader, can appropriately interact with that HTML, get that equitable experience that we were talking about before. We have a software tool, we call it Checker, where essentially to run a scan of your website and will provide you feedback so that you can make sure that HTML is compliant. And then probably the topic that everyone's most interested in here, just based on market reaction, is PDF remediation, because that's a whole separate animal. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can identify issues across your PDFs and then make a plan to actually fix them and maintain accessibility across them at scale. We know that state and local governments usually have a lot of PDFs. Kathy, I see you had a follow-up question to Michelle's 2028 or 2027. So the answer is both. So if it's above 50,000, you're going to be in the 2027 tier. 50,000 or under, you're going to be 2028. So it depends on how many folks you're serving there. Yes, Chris has put it in answer to the chat. We are happy to send some documentation from the Justice Department as well after the call here. We can put that in the chat. All right. So our assistive technology toolbar. Forgive me, I am pinch hitting for someone else today. Are we supposed to be looking at a video here, Chris, or are we going to walk through the toolbar experience?
No, I think it's for us. It's just kind of covering some of the things that we can do on the toolbar, just
Gotcha.
at high level. And I think one of the things that we kind of focus on here is giving people options and opportunities when they come onto your site so that they can explore information and data just in the way that they want to. I think that's kind of the crux of what our toolbar is about. I think in terms of the focus on PDF today, it's not a huge amount of interruption with them, but what you will find is we are going to throw a demo at you in a bit, just obviously the PDF Remediator. So I think main thing is if you've got any questions whatsoever on the assisted toolbar or anything that you'd like to see from that, please pop them in the chat. We're very, very happy to kind of walk through what that looks like for you.
Yeah. And if you want to interact with it at your own pace, you can always go to ReciteMe's home web page. We have the toolbar there. Feel free to play around with the functionality. Please feel free to reach out to us with follow-up questions if you like a more comprehensive demo. But like Chris said, when it comes to the toolbar, it's not about necessarily compliance. It's about increasing the user experience, giving individuals freedom to interact with your website in a way that's best suitable for them. So that could include translations. That's a very common one here in the U.S. We have a very diverse population, and so giving people the opportunity to translate is a big one. This is really, really powerful. An accessibility statement. Chris, I might lean on you for this a little bit too, just given your expertise here. Accessibility statements are essentially a public declaration of your purpose and your status when it comes to supporting accessibility. Without an accessibility statement, it leaves someone up to their own imagination about what you're doing with accessibility, good or bad. And unfortunately, as we know, usually people assume the worst. And so that can open a door for unnecessary lawsuits where they'll think that your organization is not doing anything about this. So having an accessibility statement that makes it really transparent that one, you acknowledge the situation, being honest about where you're at with it. It's okay to admit that you're not 100% accessible. Intent is much more powerful and realistic. Chris, what else am I missing when it comes to accessibility statements?
Oh, I think probably the key message, what I look for, if I'm looking at accessibility statement, I'm looking, are the organization being transparent? Are they kind of sharing that story around some of the things that they're potentially working on for the accessibility of their site? I'm also looking for things around, have they got plans? Are there things that they're aware of or an organization knows that perhaps isn't working so well on their site that actually gives you a workaround or some opportunities to perhaps reach out for some additional support? I think for someone coming onto your site that has a disability, potentially they may have a vision impairment and they can't find something specifically on your site. Having an accessibility statement that kind of identifies that, you may have a problem with this part of the site, but actually here's an opportunity to reach out for some additional support, and we know that we can help you with that. I think that's what I look for when I come to an accessibility statement. So transparency, honesty, and obviously just being really realistic about where you are at the moment with your website. I find that is really useful for using an accessibility statement as kind of that storytelling piece of where you are in your journey. So we've got a couple of good examples as well. If you do need a template, for example, or you need some examples around what sort of things that you put in your accessibility statement, we do have a template that we can share out after the webinar if that's for you. We also provide some opportunity where we can do a little bit of consultancy if you need to. I've seen some pretty fantastic statements over the years. The ones that are kind of stuck in my mind are the ones where people have just not made any effort, and they're the ones that you're really opening up the doors there for, or lowering your, increasing your risk effectively for someone to come to your site and potentially just try to look for opportunities where they can perhaps go down the legal route. So you want to kind of help with that and just go, well, these are some things that we know of. This is how we can help. So cool. I think it's for me, probably one of the most favorite parts of a website. For me, if I get to a website and I see that they have an accessibility statement on their site, that's usually the first point I go to. So you can think if you've got other people or other organizations that are coming to your site, let's make it easy for them to find as well. So hopefully it helps.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that is if one of your constituents does have is having a problem interacting with your website, they're going to probably try to find your accessibility statement to provide that feedback. Much more likely to get a cooperative conversation if that accessibility statement exists and if that accessibility statement reflects current acknowledgement of the situation. We see a lot of times where there will be an accessibility statement, but it was last updated in 2020. And it's talking about WCAG 2.0, which isn't even the law anymore. And I think that just sort of compounds. And suddenly, someone that was just having an inconvenient time interacting with your website, now they're really getting frustrated. And that's when it starts to snowball into something potentially more serious. So, as Chris mentioned, we have a template that you're free to use. It's a really easy, low lift way to show that you're committed to this. So we have a question in the chat. How do you balance brevity with transparency and honesty? I think that's a great question. And I think this is where Chris's team shines a little bit, being the subject matter experts where they can really find that, thread that needle, so to speak. Chris, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, there's a couple of things that we've got on the slide that I'll kind of walk through very quickly. And one of them is just really demonstrating the effort that you are putting in as an organization. What a great message to send out to your audiences and potentially disabled people coming to your sites as well, that you actually genuinely care about making their experience good for them. So I think for us, it's, I find when we're trying to balance that transparency and honesty, there's obviously certain things that you won't put on there. One of them is, for example, if you've got industry secrets or trade secrets or particular things that are going to expose your business in areas that are protected. But I think when you're looking at the general usability of something and being transparent and open, that's going to lead, like David said, to much more positive conversations where you are able to get more information, learn a little bit more around your users first or your clients before making any assumptions. So for me, it's about commitment, demonstrating accessibility commitment. There are obviously some other bits that you could put on there around third parties, for example. So if you are working with third-party vendors that are providing things like your booking processes or, for example, account logins and bits where usually they're third-party bought in, those generally, that's where it's an opportunity for you to kind of identify that you're working with other third parties to make sure that they are also taking into account accessibility. So I think for us, when we look at those transparency and honesty, I would probably champion that and going, well, why wouldn't we want that for our clients? We want our clients to be trusting us. We want our clients to kind of be respecting our efforts and making sure that they feel valued in their journey coming to your site. And your accessibility statement is effectively that front door, letting people know that that's what you're about. So very long-winded. Hopefully it helps. But yeah, we love these sorts of questions as well. So keep them coming.
It's a worthy conversation, and I think it depends a little bit on your organization and where you are in your accessibility journey. So there is a bit of an art to creating these. And so again, we're happy to help that. We have a universal template. If you want something a little bit more handcrafted, Chris's team is available to help with that as well.
Brilliant.
The next slide is our.
Slide. There we go.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
For us, so I know we touched on it briefly. I want to also make sure that we have a good level of time to go through some of the slides. We're showing some of the bits around PDF as well. But just for those that are interested, obviously we've got an accessibility checker. You may have your own checkers. You may have your own services that you're using to go through some of your accessibility compliance checks. Now, one of the really important things to look at when you're looking at ADA compliance is being able to demonstrate and show that you're improving, and show that you're actually actively conducting accessibility testing, and it's logged and it's tracked, and you can obviously demonstrate that. So we do have a checker. I'll briefly plug it slightly. So Recite Me website accessibility checker. It's more focused on the automated scans of your site. So remembering my team, and potentially you have teams in your own organizations as well, they'll look at those manual accessibility checks as well. So this is kind of more focused on automated testing that can be done programmatically, and obviously you can use that to kind of help you get an understanding of what your baseline accessibility of your site is. So some of the things that I will say that Checker can do, for example, it can provide automated checks. It can help with some of those accessibility issues, and it can help you. I think this is a really important one, even outside of Checker, is how do you prioritize accessibility issues that are coming into your teams? So for us, we do have that check-in engine that can help with that. But I think it's really important. So we'll perhaps touch on that briefly as we go through some of the PDF things as well. But also it's about kind of looking at how do you make sure that you're continually developing and improving your site and you're not going backwards. So outside of this is, if, for example, you have one team that are developing a site and they're doing amazing things over here and you can see that they're improving, how do you bring best practice from that team and potentially implant in other teams to help them as well if they're struggling? So that's kind of where we can use some of the checker and some of the automated tools to help you with that. One of the things that it can't do, okay, so this is very, very open and honest, is checker, like many other accessibility testing tools that are automated, they always need a human in the loop at some point. So it's kind of looking at that human judgment, that context setting. So a good example of that could be if you have alternative text or a text-based image, automated checks can check to see whether you've got the right text there, but it can't add context and value. So that's where you kind of find human judgment comes into play. It also it determines where kind of assistance is needed. So it looks at, for example, if you go to a website or perhaps your PDFs and you've got the layout of the screen really crowded with content and it just doesn't make sense to somebody that's looking at it, whether that's with assistive technology or just generally reading through, that's where human context tends to help. So loads of things you can do with automated. You must always look at kind of that manual aspect as well, just to bring in and make sure that you've got everything covered. So if I was to help you with some of that, prioritize things like your homepage, your contact us page are really good for for getting people in with good context and being able to help and support people. Your services pages, anything to do with kind of your terms and conditions and policies. There's some of the areas that I would particularly focus if I was prioritizing remediation and issues. That's where that's where our team focus on generally if we're doing an automated or manual audit. Okay, so plenty to get involved in. Again, without plugging it too much, if you want to have a look at the checker in more depth, by all means, absolutely reach out to us and we can help with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one thing I'll add to this is just because we're talking to a lot of state and local government agencies on today's call, stuff like this is still really, really important, even if you're using a third party to build or host your website. We run across this a lot where they say, well, I'm not too worried about the compliance angle. I've worked with so-and-so and they've told me that the templates at the website that I bought from them is accessible. And I think that's mostly true. The analogy I like to use is that if you bought a house, and when you buy the house, everything's up to code. But as you live in it, you might just start put furniture in it. You might start to make alterations to it, and slowly over time, some of those unintentionally might take things out of code. that's your responsibility, not whoever built the house or whoever sold it to you. You made those alterations, you made those changes. So it's important that you still have this layer on top of that, and also a little bit of trust but verify. Someone says that it's accessible. Okay, wouldn't it be nice to have a little bit of independent confirmation of that statement instead of getting a nasty surprise in the form of a lawsuit? So again, we won't plug this too hard, but just want to say that there is uses for it, even if you're using a third party. Matt, I saw your question in there about uh, library market. I am asking our team in the Slack. Hopefully, we can get a response for you before the webinar is over. If not, we'll follow up with you. We work with lots of libraries, but I'm not personally familiar with library markets, so I'll have to follow up with you on that one there.
That's a great question. Really, really great question. I think there was a stat I noticed earlier where um, people were moving away from hard-coded websites to kind of more platform. I think the metrics were something like 75% of websites were manually hard-coded compared to 30% now. So you can see there's definitely a slide there and a difference in the market, which is useful. I think also just going very quickly on check on the automated side of things, think of your business continuity. So staff move. Okay, you may hire somebody and they come and do a fantastic job, and then move on to the next role. And actually, what you can do with automated tools there, particularly Checker, is it helps you with just keeping that continuity in your business. So you haven't got movement of knowledge. Whereas if you may do manual or like auditing, you may find that person moves on to a different role and actually can leave you quite short. So that's kind of the balance between the two. I think I'm on to the next part, David. So I think that's me. Some big numbers on this slide. So PDFs remain one of the most common ways organizations publish information online. And there's a huge number, 2.5 trillion PDFs. So this is a number that's estimated from Adobe. And this is kind of PDFs that are kind of out in the wild at the moment. So again, you may find this number, I think it's continually growing, but 2.5 trillion. It's a huge, huge area to look at. I think for us, where do PDFs appear on your website? I think most of us come across PDFs potentially on a daily basis. But for us, we've got things like application forms, so jobs, services, memberships. If you've got applications into gyms, for example, we've got reports and publications. So annual reports, research, strategy. There's a huge amount of information in those. One of the things that we do find reports and publications. I've come across many of these, and David, you might have done too. Reports and publications, 600 pages long on some of these reports. So you can just imagine the sheer scale and size of these. We've got things like guides and resources. So you tend to find PDFs. They're really good at holding loads of lovely graphics and being able to lay out things that can't really traditionally do on a word processing platform. So there's much more design on it. However, things like how-to documents, brochures, instructions, again, they all fall into kind of how do you make a PDF accessible. We've got some of those policies, got official documentation. So, we're talking about terms and conditions, regulations, procedures, loads of those things that people independently go to, where actually they don't necessarily want other people involved in those discussions. So I don't know, if I'm trying to return a product or do something, I just want to read the terms and conditions before I make any approach to an organization if I'm going to supply, be returning things. So for us, you've got policies, official documentation, and then I think we've got products and service information. So you tend to find a lot of PDFs cover things like spec sheets, manuals with step-by-step process in them, and safety information. So I think just looking at that, the huge variety of different areas that we find PDFs being used in, it's significant, isn't it? I think that's kind of where we're looking at. So we are looking at 2.2 on this slide. So I know WCAG 2.2 doesn't apply to everybody, particularly in the US. So you'd be looking at WCAG 2.1. But obviously for us, PDF accessibility plays into that. So most of the engine that we use, so our PDF remediation tool itself and others, they base their kind of core checks on WCAG 2.1, and effectively WCAG 2.1 does have a set of rules and regulations that you can kind of follow to kind of, or standards, should we say, to just make sure that your accessibility of your PDF meets a good set or good standard set. So we will pop out the link as well. I think we've got the WCAG 2.2 techniques that we'll try and pop out in a second. But for us, it kind of really does underpin how well you can do PDF accessibility. So it's really, really valuable, I would say, to go to W3C site, look at the techniques on there, and just make sure that you're kind of covering off some of those easy things that you can do on a PDF itself. So any questions on that, feel free to pop them in the chat. I think, just starting with some of the easy ones, which we're going to show you in a second, will make a lot of difference. Okay, so I think for us, what's the impact of an inaccessible PDF? Now, the easiest one to kind of point out here is we're excluding up to a quarter or 25% of people with a disability. Okay, so thinking back to when we were talking about those application forms, those terms and conditions that just give somebody the ability to find information out independently, 25% of those people you could potentially be excluding from your businesses from having access to your services. That obviously does present a compliance and legal risk. Okay, so I think for us, balancing between those two and looking at user experience, making sure people can have access to the content is the right thing to do. There is obviously that compliance and legal risk part of it. And then also, I think we talked about prioritization of PDFs and how you would look at content. Well, look at the barriers, look at some of those key journeys that you've got people coming into your services, particularly for, are they trying to log an issue with a service? Are they trying to raise an inquiry? Are they trying to just buy something from you? Some of those key barriers, some of those key journeys, it's really worth exploring and looking through those, just to make sure that you've got really accessible PDFs as that really good, nice entry into your service. So it's really worth looking at those. I'm going to go through some of the common PDF accessibility failures, just to kind of give you the context around that. I think we picked about a few really high profile ones. So the first one is, and I'd love to, if you've got experience of this or you've come across some of these issues in your day, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'd love to hear from you if these are areas that you're experiencing. So the first one I tend to find if I'm looking at a PDF is it tagged appropriately for assistive technologies to come in and really understand the structure of the document, but also how it should be portrayed to assistive technologies. So missing or incorrect tags. So tags in a PDF, they provide things like markup. They also make sure that, for example, headings are highlighted correctly or they're structured correctly in the PDF. So actually when somebody using assistive technologies come along and they want to use the document and perhaps navigate using headers, that actually the tags are there to help somebody get through that document. So for us, they've really helped with just structuring the document in a way that makes it compatible with assistive technologies and easier to use people that might be using it slightly differently to others. Another area that we find is images without alt text. So for those that haven't come across it before, alt text is alternative text or text-based version of a graphical image. So not all images require this. So you might have images that are just decorative, so they don't add any context. They're there just to kind of help with breaking up content, making it look slightly nicer or prettier. But actually, they're just not needed. So if somebody that's coming across this with a screen reader or vision impairment, if they can't see the image, they've got enough context around it and enough text with a text-based alternative that it doesn't take away from that experience there. Okay, but if there are images or text, for example, or images of text, shall we say, they would need alternative text behind them. So to add alternative text, you're looking at being able to go into some of the settings of whatever platform you use. So you might be using something like Word, being able to right click, and you tend to find there's options there to add alternative text. Okay, so just remember to keep it really concise. You don't need to kind of effectively, we're not looking for 10 paragraphs worth of information. We're looking at a really tight text-based alternative that somebody can understand what text is, or sorry, that image that's on a page, and make it really easy. So a good example could be that you have an event coming up. Event's got some dates in a graphic that's on the screen, and you can use the text alternative to explain when the date is, a little bit of information about the venue, and kind of any other context. It just gives somebody that additional information that they might need. Okay, so really key one. Another area that we find is insufficient color contrast. So what we're talking about here is looking at the background color, the foreground color, two different areas, and going, well, based on those different colors. So a good example on the screen is just some text there, black text on the white background. If the colors are too similar between the background and the foreground, what tends to happen is the content just becomes really difficult to see, because you can imagine very similar in close of color, you just can't make out what the text is. So there are ways of checking for this. So we've got a Recite Me color contrast checker that we're very happy to share out if anybody wanted to see it. But what it effectively does is it takes a measurement of the color at the front, the color at the back, and it goes, are they different enough that actually it's easy enough to see? So we're trying to meet a standard of 4.5/1, which is the color contrast ratio between the two. There are some differences if you're looking at larger text and other areas of the screen. However, generally text is a good example. Small text, you should be meeting that color contrast ratio, and it should make, you know what, it just make your text so much more easier to see on the screen that it benefits everybody. We've got missing document language. So really key one. What that does is it explains to assistive technologies that are coming to your document, and it goes, do you know what, this is going to be in US English or British English, and that then lets their assistive technology know that this is the language we want accented. So it will pick the English language language pack from their assistive technology, so like a screen reader, for example, and it will actually use the right accents when it's going through the content. Okay, so it just helps break down, it gives the language well. It also makes things like typefaces or fonts are supported as well, because not all fonts are used across different languages. So it just really helps. A super easy thing to do. You just need to add the document language. Most documents, they're quite easy to find in the settings. You can go in and you can just amend that and just give it a bit of a change. Okay, so much easier to do. We've got missing document titles, so it's very easy. I do this as well. I have to go back and make correct my mistakes. So easy to just create a document these days that you just go, I'm really busy, I just want to get something down on a document. But actually what you do is you miss a really important thing. You put a really bad or rubbish title on there, and I've done it myself. Rubbish titles or titles that are just too generic make it super difficult for someone that's using assistive technologies or someone with a cognitive disability to actually just go and find the document. Okay, so for us, setting accurate document titles, because it's usually the first thing that's announced by assistive technologies, really helps make sure that your document can be quickly found and understand that it's a PDF and what the terminology is. Okay, so it's an easy thing to do. Takes you 10 seconds to do, if that. We've got inaccessible tables. So these are probably my team's favorite thing to work on. I know Abby and my team loves these. Tables are they can be really difficult if you're using a voice technology. So screen readers, for example, to just navigate through. So you can imagine you come into a table, you may have vision impairment, you're not able to see the structure of that table. Just making sure that it's tagged correctly. So we talked about tagging just a second ago. Tables are very similar, so you can use things like clear table headers, so screen readers understand what the relationship is between the table header and the text or the body of the table that you're trying to navigate through. Also make sure that things like the table is properly tagged. So PDFs they're quite good at doing this. You just need to spend a little bit of time just making sure that you've tagged them. Once you've done that, super easy, and it just makes sure that somebody is coming across your table, understands what the table is about, they can navigate the table and actually get the right relationships between the content and what the headings stand for. Okay, so super easy thing to do. just making, I think we're on time, Dave. I think we're okay. Just looking at some of the, why do organizations struggle with remediating PDFs? Now, I think the main thing is just the vast amount of PDFs. So volumes of legacy PDFs, there's huge numbers. Ongoing publishing. So I like to reference this as being, you might have the PDF hole in your boat and you're slowly plugging them all, but actually what's happening is you're still having more PDFs coming in. So looking at that source there as to why you've got inaccessible PDFs coming into your process is really cool. You've got lack of visibility. Okay, so where are these PDFs coming from? Sometimes it's quite difficult to look at legacy processes. This is the big one. So remediation, some manual remediation costs. Remember, I spoke about a PDF that we come across recently, 600 pages long. Trying to manually remediate that's going to take a long time. So we must be looking at manual remediation, but also that's also help. That's why some organizations struggle. They may not have the internal skills to be able to remediate, but also just the sheer level of commitment that's needed from manually remediating can sometimes outweigh the time that you need to be able to do that. Prioritizing strategies. So looking at why are some PDFs more important than others? We're going to cover that in a second. But also just that complexity to remediate and the time that it takes. So if any of these resonate with you, I'd love to know in the chat if any of these are kind of things that you're struggling with. Feel free to pop them in the chat. I'd love to talk through that with you as well. So what can you do about inaccessible PDFs? Okay, one of the things that I wouldn't recommend is burying your head in the sand. Doesn't work. I think for us is rather than trying to fix everything at once, look at more effective approaches. So things like understand where PDFs exist across your platforms. Okay, a big one. Because if you know that things are coming in from a third party, for example, or you've got a particular piece of software that creates an issue, that's a really good place to start, isn't it? So prioritizing some of those, look at some of those key impact or key user journeys that are going to cause an issue. Introduce a scalable way to improve accessibility over time. It needs to be sustainable, doesn't it? It needs to be something that you can carry on with, and it's not a huge effort every time you pick up the PDF remediation. Once you get to that point, you tend to find not a lot happens, so you need to make sure it's sustainable and manageable. This is how you prioritize. I'm not going to go for everything on this slide, so we will share them, but I will pick a couple. So high priorities, like we said, you're going to be looking at things like application forms, because they're a really key entry point. Why would you discriminate against somebody perhaps applying for a role or a job with you? Medium priorities, we've got things like reports and publications. So they're still out in the wild. They're still really useful PDFs that have got a huge amount of information in them. Things like reports and publications, they can actually help some of your clients recognize whether they want to work with you or not based on your reports. So factor in disability in that. Those reports and publications help people make educated guesses as to whether they want to come and work with your organization. And just some of those lower priorities doesn't mean they're not a priority. Lower priorities could be things like historical reports or old campaign material. So it's not effectively homing in on the decision, but actually it's something somebody might want to reflect on and spend a bit of time to learn about your organization. So they're just some of the areas that we've got there. Again, we'll share the slides so you can have a look at through the rest of them, but hopefully this might help you as you're streamlining some of your PDFs into where they're important and the priority is just something to bear in mind. I am going to pass back over to David. So David's going to go through an introduction of what our PDF remediation tool can do. If you've got any questions about anything else that we've covered, absolutely feel free to pop them in the Q&A. If we don't cover them on the Q&A today, we will have a document circulated back after with responses and answers. So other than that, over to you, David.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. If you could just confirm that I'm sharing the correct screen here.
I will stop sharing my screen because that might interrupt you, and then I'll let yours take over. I can see your screen, David.
All right, perfect. Thanks. So piggybacking off what Chris was just talking about, the first thing that we want to do whenever we start working on PDF remediation is we want to run a crawl, and we want to understand what your PDF landscape looks like so that we can start putting things into actionable buckets. Chris talked a little bit about prioritization, understanding where these PDFs are coming from. So running that crawl is really useful, not just so that we can provide you with some pretty pie charts and bar graphs, but so we can start putting some context around PDFs. Just to give you an example here, we do have the ability to create groups inside of this. We have a unique number of filters that we can understand when we run a crawl. For example, when was the PDF created? When was it last modified? File size, so it's usually related. Page count, has it already been tagged? Really, really important for accessibility. Does it have form fields, unique images, all these things? These are all variables that we can use to start putting those PDFs into context and start putting them into silos. Here are things that maybe you no longer need. Here are things that might be a good candidate for archiving, not actively needed by your constituents, but might be needed down the road, versus what's something that everyone is using constantly on our website. Sort of the low-hanging fruit, the most obvious things. Let's put those into the first batch for remediation. I'm going to show you a little bit about what you get through our remediation service. I should have prefaced this at the beginning just saying that we are a fully managed service. So the goal of this is that we will analyze your PDF landscape. We will identify those for remediation. What we're going to return to you is an accessible version of that PDF. There are some software tools where they'll run that analysis. They'll create an actionable list of things to fix. As Chris mentioned, it's really difficult to do when you have a large backlog. So our goal here is that we're going to return a remediated document back to you so that you no longer have that problem. So this is a fully managed service that we're looking at here. We're doing it through automation to speed things up and to get it done in a more cost-effective manner. So if we take a look at an example that I remediated here, we can go into the results. We're really transparent in all the work that we do here. So with every single remediated document, you would get access to a link like this, where if in the future you wanted to go back and take a look at what exactly our analysis found as far as accessibility violations, what were the accessibility violations that we fixed? If you wanted to actually look at the remediated PDF so that you could download it and have it for the future, all of that is available to you inside of the platform. As far as our reporting goes, we do test against all 23 WCAG success criteria, specifically the 23 WCAG success criteria that are applicable to PDFs. In addition, we've also added another layer to this. We added this PDF metadata. That's our 24 success criteria. So what I'm getting at is there's no gaps here in our coverage there. It's a very thorough assessment of any accessibility issues within the PDF. In addition to finding those issues, as I mentioned, this is a fully managed service. We're going to return a remediated PDF for you. So in the middle column here, we're going to actually show you the work that we did. So in this example, it went through OCR, optical character recognition. That's usually the first step in making a PDF accessible. It essentially allows to convert what was previously maybe just a picture, an image of a piece of paper, actually translate that into compatible text that a screen reader or other assistive technology can understand and interact with. So we'll give you all of this information here. In addition to our own reporting, we do have a pretty lengthy QA process. Chris's team of subject matter experts are constantly pressure testing the machine and providing that feedback to our product team. In addition, we also use third-party tools like Pack or Adobe. And the idea there is when we kick off a partnership, we'll run it through here. We'll make sure that the PDF comes back clean, and then we'll take it to an open source tool. It has no reason to lie in favor or against us. And if that open source tool agrees that we have an accessible document, then we feel confident that we can move forward with returning remediated documents to you. So that's the nickel tour of our platform. I want to make sure that we leave time for questions at the end. So Chris, I'll hand it back over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just popped a couple of questions in there. I think the first one was if you were asked at any point to kind of highlight how many PDFs that you've got across your organization, I think probably the thought-provoking question is, would you be able to tell somebody? I think, you know, that's one of the biggest areas that I think most people struggle with is just, well, how do I find that out? So I think looking at the tool that we've just presented does help you with that. There are obviously other tools that can kind of do a very similar thing as well. So I'd love to kind of hear more from you on that. I've also popped in a link in there. So David, as you were going through that, you could see on the left-hand side the checks that have been done, the techniques that have been loaded, and obviously the fixes that were also on there as well. One thing you would notice is there's a very small piece of text on that kind of highlights what technique was used to do that test. So I've popped a link in here at the moment, just directly to the W3C website that particularly looks at the WCAG 2.0 PDF technique. So I would strongly recommend, if you're kind of looking at how do you start with your how do you start with accessibility from that first point, go and have a look at that, read it, because you might find that helps with some of your questions, but also extend out as well to some of those WCAG standards. Okay, so we deliberately not gone into WCAG at the level that we do when we do manual auditing. That's for another day. We'd love to talk to you about that. So if you do find you've got questions around it, please let us know. We're happy to help. But I think the first starting point is just start by learning about what this stuff is. Okay. I have got a slide. David, is my last thought slide showing?
Yes, it is.
It is. Excellent. So what we tend to do at the end of webinars is we come across to both panelists and both hosts, and we just ask this question. So what are your last thoughts? So David, I know you stepped in for Kelly, so you may not have time to prep for this, but have you got any lasting thoughts from your side? And I'll share mine after.
It put me on the spot a little bit, but I think having spoken to enough organizations over the past 18 months or so about this, I think the thing that I'm always preaching is that we probably shared a lot of information with you today, and it might feel overwhelming. Progress over perfection is a very common theme in our industry, and it's really relevant to organizations at the state and local government level because we're conscious of resources, both money, bandwidth, expertise, all of these things that go into making your assets accessible. It's hard work. It's doable though, and I think the most important thing is to not get frustrated and give up if something doesn't work perfectly. We talked about accessibility statements in the beginning and being transparent. There probably will be some accessibility issues on your website. That's okay. Acknowledging them and having a plan to eventually, hopefully in a reasonable timeline, get to resolving them. That's way more important than coming back with a perfect, we don't have any accessibility issues. In fact, that's probably going to introduce more challenges than not. So, progress over perfection would be my lasting thought.
Great. So I can also sense a tone of ownership in as well. Own it. Make sure that you kind of know what you're doing. And that's really useful. I'll share mine very quickly. So mine was around. So what I tried to do. We talk very heavily about compliance, and absolutely, of course, we should. There's deadlines that we need to meet. There's legal risks. We need to obviously lower that exposure. But for me, accessibility is about people. Okay, it's about making sure that our friends, our family, our loved ones, our clients as well, whether they have a disability at present or whether that's something they acquire. We're all getting older as we go through. We're all going to need accessibility at some point. So for me, I think as we go through this process, just my lasting thought is just to not lose sight of why we're doing this, and obviously bring people in first in the process. So hopefully that kind of helps a few people. It definitely helps with that context level setting, and it hopefully aligns. I think it aligns to yours as well, David, in terms of where you're going and what you should be doing. So I think that's us. I think we've got a little bit of time. I think we've got a couple of minutes for Q&A. And again, like I said, any questions that just go in, we will get a response back to you. So don't worry if we don't get to your question today.
Yep. I see we have one for Kathy. I think it's a good one. It says, do we need to clean up all previous/current PDFs or make sure future PDFs are accessible? And the answer is yes. It's everything. It's documents that you've created in the past, documents that you're publishing right now, documents that you'll publish in the future. What I will say, though, is the Title II mandate does allow exemptions for archiving documents. And I'm going to put a fact sheet inside of in the Slack right now, Kathy, and for other folks. I find it really useful as a starting point for understanding what's in scope and how you might put things into archive to take them out of scope. So the example I always like to give is, if your parks department created a flyer 3 years ago for a turkey trot they were hosting, that's all fine and well, but your constituents probably don't need access to that information anymore. It's no longer relevant. So is that a good candidate for just deleting, or at a minimum putting into archive? There might be things that legally you're not able to remove from the website permanently, council meeting notes from the 1990s. But again, do your constituents need readable access to that? Probably not. Let's put it in archive. Let's reduce our legal exposure. I think that's a really, really good starting point for that. But yes, Kathy, anything that's on your website is in scope. So be judicious in using the archive and or deleting that. You should be using those. Chris, anything to add before we go to the next question?
Oh, I was going to say, kind of mirroring what you've said there. What a great starting point. Learning about your PDF estate, but also go, right, what can we, or what do we need to move to archive because we've just left it going? That could be a really good starting point to really home in and reduce your efforts as to what you need to remediate. Initially, you can kind of get rid of those pretty quickly. So I think that would be a good starting point.
Absolutely. JSE, you got a question here. How do we access the full checker report so we can see where changes are needed? I ran the demo and see some changes that are labeled as a must change, where the report does not indicate where the changes need to be made. Yes, good question. I think there's two factors there. One, our checker is a software license. So in order to get all of the context around the accessibility violations, you would need to purchase that software subscription from us. One of our sales reps is more than happy to walk you through a more personalized demo, viewing the results from your website so that we can drill in. There is functionality within the software that allows you to get very, very specific. There's a button that says literally view issue in code, and it'll pull up a screen and it'll pop down right to the line of HTML or lines of HTML that are causing the violation. So we can get very granular with it. But that's something that probably would be more appropriate in a demo from our sales team.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Very quickly, I think last thing, just popped a QR code on the screen. Have a scan of that, because what we're offering is a free PDF accessibility check. So we'd love you to kind of take the opportunity to come and have a look, put in a couple of your PDFs, and run a free PDF scan. So we've got that there. If you do want to know anything else about that, reach out to the team. Very happy to answer any questions as well that you've got outstanding from today. And I hope you've enjoyed it. So I think we've run over 2 minutes, so it's really great for you to hold on and see us out to the end. And we really look forward to catch up. I think we just had a quick question from Michael. Is a URL available in place of the QR? We will share that out with you. So yeah, it's a very good suggestion there. We can pop that out to you.
And then Jay, to your question, we will ask that your customer success manager follows up with you. I didn't realize you were already a Toolbar customer, so that makes things a little bit easier. We'll ask that they follow up with you directly to talk a little bit more about Checker.
Other than that, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you on the next one, hopefully.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.